our worst fears, we've got to get rid of them. And you know the ones I'm talking about, right? Like somebody's going to kill me. I'm going to die broke and homeless. Or my personal favorite, I'm not going to be able to find a parking spot. Because those things, honestly, they serve no useful purpose. Well, the only purpose they serve is to keep us stuck inside our own heads. And in the end, what they really end up doing is destroying us. Because the only thing that we focus on is them. Now, the first step in getting rid of our worst fears is actually recognizing them. Because most of the time we run around all day long and we don't even realize that that's what's playing up inside our head, our worst fears. Now, in this episode, I'm going to talk about the first time I really saw those little suckers in my life and then what I did afterwards. And hopefully, they're going to help. At least I hope they do for you. So stick around. I'm Michael Cole, and welcome to my world. We are deep in mind territory here because that's where the worst fears live. Up in your head, your noggin, this place that tends to want to sometimes sabotage us, right? And worst fears, I have found, are one of the places that they really try to do it. Now, let's actually do a definition here so we know kind of what we're talking about. So a worst fear isn't a small fear or anything like that. If you're anything like me, let's say when I'm going to go out and do something or try to create something, I'm not talking about the first fears that show up in the process of doing that. I'm talking about the ones that keep trying to top each other, right? Until you finally get to that last one where it's just the biggest, baddest, nastiest fear of all. That's what we're looking at right here, okay? Now, what I want you to do is to keep in mind one of your worst fears in any subject. It doesn't matter because it'll kind of give you a little bit of a frame of reference to see whether what I'm talking about is accurate to you or you can use it or whatever, right? Okay. Now, I have to use some kind of worst fear in the explanation here, right? So I'm going to use a wacky one, okay? I'm going to use one where, let's say, if you are worried, your worst fear is that an airplane engine will suddenly detach from a perfectly good airplane flying thousands and thousands and thousands of feet up in the air. It will detach, plummet down towards the earth at the speed of light, and smack you right on top of your head. Okay? Ridiculous, right? Never happened in a million years, right? Total imagination. Well, that worst fear is about as useful and likely to happen as whatever you have in your head, right? Now, you may not believe it right now, but I'm telling you, once we get done here, hopefully you're going to be able to see that. Because then in the end, you can decide whether it's really useful to focus on your worst fears. And a little bit of a spoiler alert, it isn't. Now, my first break in all of this happened in my early 40s when I was between jobs, as you say, right? I was kind of like a little worried about things. But even beyond that, the longer and longer it went, I started getting some really bad fears. And honestly, what I was thinking was I was worried that I was going to be broke and homeless. And it sounds stupid to even think of that, right? But it's actually real. And I was worried about it, and I was hurting myself with it constantly. And I was in panic. I couldn't sleep. I was just in fear all the time. Until one morning I woke up, and it was funny. This one question came to me, and it was, have you ever been broke? Well, no. Okay, then have you ever been homeless? No, but I mean, it could happen, right? I mean, it could definitely happen. But I started to think, okay, well, I've got my friends, I've got my family. I'd be able to stay with somebody until they got tired of me, right? And then that's when it really clicked for me. That all these fears that I've been feeling that felt really real, like they were going to happen, they were just simply my worst fear, right? It was just my worst fear around that particular subject. So I'm going to be broke and homeless was just my worst fear around money. If I believe that an airplane engine is going to drop out of the sky and hit me on top of the head, well, that could be a worst fear, that I'm going to die suddenly or horrifically or tragically, right? And then that's when I started to realize that these worst fears that I was feeling, the worst fear was just a thing. It was one possibility, one possible outcome. Yeah, it was the worst possible outcome, but it was still just one possible outcome. Just the same as the best possible thing was also a possibility, right? Because maybe I got a job the next day. And then, of course, there were all the infinite possibilities of things that could happen in between those two ends of stuff. So suddenly I realized that my worst fear was just one possibility out of an infinite number of possibilities. And I know you're going to sit there just like I do even to this day, and I'm going to sit there and I'm going to argue from my worst fears, and I'm going to say, yeah, but they're going to happen, and this is how it can happen, and this is how the plane engine can fall out of the sky, and this is how I can be blah, 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 right? But in the end, if you're honest, like I was with myself, you end up seeing that worst fears usually never happen. And really what they are, they're just ways to keep ourselves frightened and stuck. And that's all they are. Now, there's one other thing about worst fears, and this is the most insidious aspect of these things. And it's that every worst fear that you have has this almost unbreakable bond with the belief that it's gonna happen, right? And I know you felt this before. I felt it with my, broken homeless thing. I mean, it was gonna happen. There was just no two ways about it. It is just like bound together. But that was the other side effect of, and actually what really truly happened when I separated out that worst fear and realized it was just one possibility. That bond was broken. That was the other aspect of it. The bond was broken, and suddenly you're just left with that fear. And the fear becomes this little yapping dog, right? Because it just wants the attention. It just wants to let you know that it's going to happen, and it's going to keep bothering you all day long, and it's not particularly pleasant to listen to either, right? It just wants to control your life. It wants to take over. It just wants to make you do what it wants. But on the other side of that also, I have to admit that I also chose to focus on that worst fear. And you have to remember something about focus. Whatever you focus on feeds itself. And you got to be clear what we're focusing on here is your worst fear. So if you're focusing on your worst fear, what do you think you're going to get throughout your entire day? You're going to get more of that worst fear. And all of a sudden, everything that you see is going to prove that it's going to happen. But don't fall for that, because that, in the end, is a lie. The biggest lie there is. And in case it's not like really crystal clear here yet, those worst fears are actually destroying your life because you're focusing on them instead of what you want in your life. So focus on what you want in your life, whether that's going out fishing or learning to dance or to play the piano or to bake cookies or look at a sunrise, or God help you when you're really feeling it, to actually focus on your dreams. Because in the end, the greatest power we have in our lives is the power to focus. And you get to choose what you focus on. So it's up to you. Do you want to focus on your worst fears or maybe your best dreams? Because in the real end, that's where the power is. And that's your decision. Choose well. That's it for this week's episode. If you like it, hit the like button. If you want to subscribe and haven't already, go ahead, subscribe. Come along for the journey. But there's only one more thing I've got to tell you about all of this stuff. And it's a very profound quote on worst fears. And the quote is this: worst fears suck. Love ya. What are you going to do? few of those worst fears?